Welcome back to the Explanation Pro. Today I'll recap a family adventure film called Heidi. Spoilers incoming. The movie begins with a young girl, named Heidi, who is traveling with her aunt, Diet, to the Swiss Alps where her grandfather lives. As they walk through the village, a village woman notices Diet and tries to stop Diet from sending Heidi to her grandfather, whom they call Uncle Alps, for they claim that Uncle Alps is godless. When they reached Uncle Alps' place, Diet introduces Heidi to him but he does not respond. Diet continues to explain that she found a job at Frankfurt and cannot care for Heidi anymore, but Uncle Alps does not want to take responsibility for her. Despite Uncle Alps' refusal to take Heidi, Diet still leaves Heidi to him and quickly escapes the place. Left without a choice, Uncle Alps heads to his house and leaves Heidi outside, thus Heidi spends the night at the stable with the goats instead. The next day, Uncle Alps goes to the stable to harvest milk from the goat to offer it to Heidi. Heidi gladly indulges on the milk but is saddened to know that Uncle Alps plans to take her away to the cleric. They visit the cleric and Uncle Alps insists that he takes Heidi, thus, the cleric agrees to take her to Mayenfeld but will have to wait for 3 days until then. The cleric also reminds Uncle Alps that it is his Christian duty to look after his grandchild. Heidi stays with Uncle Alps for the meantime and eventually allows Heidi to stay in his house. Heidi happily chooses the hay room upstairs to sleep in, and during supper, Heidi tells Uncle Alps that she'd rather not be adopted to another home, but Uncle Alps does not respond. The next morning, Heidi sees a young goat herd, named Peter, who tends Uncle Alps' goats at the Alps. Heidi, excited to go about her day, tags along with Peter as instructed by Uncle Alps. The children go to the Alps and tend the herd together, and while doing so, Heidi takes in the beautiful view of the Swiss Alps. While Heidi plays with the goats, Peter sneakily steals a bite from Heidi's packed lunch but denies taking a bite from it. Suddenly, the goats fight and Peter hurriedly stops them by whipping them with a stick. Heidi stops Peter from hurting them, but Peter explains that they need to be punished because they produce less milk when they fight. In order to stop Peter from punishing the goats, Heidi offers half of her food every day to Peter in exchange to not hurt the goats again, which Peter gladly accepts. While having fun, Peter tells Heidi not to tell her Uncle Alps about sharing food with him because he fears about the rumor of her uncle being a murderer. At supper, Heidi worries that the rumor about her grandfather might be true, but Uncle Alps tells Heidi that people like saying nasty things and that she will have to decide whether she will believe what others say or trust him. Eventually, Heidi chooses to believe him and hugs him, which melts the heart of Uncle Alps. The next morning, Peter and Heidi paint their faces with the ink from berries at the Alps. Heidi then tells Peter that she will be leaving tomorrow, which upsets Peter, but when Heidi returns home, she is surprised to see another chair at the dinner table. Uncle Alps confirms that she will continue to stay with him at the Alps. Heidi is now adopted by her grandfather and continues to play with Peter every day at the Alps. Sadly, Peter tells Heidi that he will be going to school tomorrow, for the duration of winter, and will meet her again in spring. Peter then tells Heidi to visit him and that his grandmother will be happy to meet her. During winter, Uncle Alps and Heidi go to the village to exchange a goat for some things. Upon arriving at the store, the cleric argues with Uncle Alps to send Heidi to school, but Uncle Alps rejects the suggestion. At home, Heidi sadly watches through the window and Uncle Alps gives her a handmade small wood eagle carving as a gift, but she thanks him with sad eyes. Because of this, Uncle Alps decides to take Heidi to Peter's house the next day. Uncle Alps and Heidi ride the sledge as they travel down to Peter's place. Heidi enjoys the ride on the sledge and stays at Peter's house for the day. Heidi meets Peter's family and Peter's grandmother happily welcomes her. Heidi is soon reunited with Peter and they eat supper together. While at the dining table, Peter argues with his guardian about the unimportance of education in the village. Heidi notices that the grandmother cannot eat stale bread because of her missing teeth. Uncle Alps then fetches Heidi home and Heidi expresses how grateful she is that they are lucky because Uncle Alps is still strong. When spring came, Diet visits the Alps again, but this time to take Heidi back. Diet explains to Uncle Alps that she found a place for Heidi at Frankfurt and she wants to take Heidi immediately. But Uncle Alps claims Heidi is his and drives Diet away. Diet is determined to take Heidi with her, thus, she waits on her at a nearby tree and spots Heidi with Peter tending the herd. Diet explains to Heidi that she will be taking her to a wealthy family at Frankfurt, but Heidi does not want to leave. Diet persuades Heidi by tricking her that even Uncle Alps wants her to go. She then makes a promise that if ever Heidi did not like Frankfurt, she can always return home. Peter returns at Uncle Alp's place without Heidi. This makes Uncle Alps panic and hurriedly goes down the village to stop them, but is too late. Upon arriving at Frankfurt, they visit the mansion of Seesman where Heidi will reside. They meet with Miss Rottenmeier, Clara's governess, but she thinks that Heidi is not fit to be Clara's companion. Diet insists that Heidi is exactly who Mr. Seesman is looking for and wants her payment for the deal. Clara, a young lady in a wheelchair, engages in a conversation with Heidi and befriends her. During supper, Heidi is served food as Miss Rottenmeier discusses the strict rules of the house, but in the middle of it Heidi falls asleep. The next morning, Tinette washes Heidi and dresses her in a fancy dress to meet with Clara and Miss Rottenmeier, but before heading upstairs she slips a bread roll in her pocket. At lunch, Clara teaches Heidi some table manners and they continue on the day taking lessons from a private tutor. The tutor instructs Heidi to read a chapter of a book, but when Heidi confesses that she does not know how to read, even the alphabet, this shocks the tutor, thus he recommends to Miss Rottenmeier that they should hire a separate tutor to not interrupt Clara's lesson. Miss Rottenmeier continues to speak ill of Heidi, saying that she is a wild, uneducated creature, but still insists that Heidi be taught alongside Clara, for she will be leaving as soon as Mr. Seesman returns. After their lesson, Clara takes Heidi to a room where she shows a painting of herself and her mother, whom had passed away. Clara tells Heidi that after her mother's passing, her father is always away and she is stuck in the mansion. During the afternoon rest, Heidi asks Sebastian, the butler, to open the windows for her to see the Alps. Sebastian opens the windows and tells her that she might see the Alps at the tower, which is across from the mansion at the marketplace. Heidi then brings Clara with her to the market to go to the tower, but Clara tells her that they should be back before the afternoon rest is over. The children enjoy their day out the mansion as they look for the tower at the market. When they reach the entrance of the tower, Clara tells Heidi to go up and leave her outside. Heidi then goes up the tower but is disappointed to find out that the Alps were nowhere to be seen. Clara, on the other hand, is offered by a woman to adopt kittens for some pennies, which she gladly agrees. When afternoon rest was over, Miss Rottenmeier goes to Clara's room to wake her up, but is shocked to find her missing. The whole house panics and Miss Rottenmeier orders Sebastian to look for the children outside. Sebastian spots the children and brings them home. When Miss Rottenmeier sees them inside, Sebastian defends them, for they were only out to get some fresh air, but this did not stop Miss Rottenmeier from scolding Heidi. Miss Rottenmeier suddenly sneezes and the kittens reveal themselves. Turns out Miss Rottenmeier is allergic to fur and is scared of cats. Miss Rottenmeier then orders Sebastian to dispose of the kittens, but Sebastian assures the children that he will take care of them. At lunch, Miss Rottenmeier punishes Heidi by not giving her lunch and ordering her to stand and face the wall as they dine. The incident upsets Heidi, thus she packs her belongings and tries to leave the house, but Miss Rottenmeier stops her and tells her that she cannot leave the house as she pleases. While Miss Rottenmeier forces Heidi back upstairs, Heidi's bag falls, revealing the bread rolls she took for Peter's grandmother. Clara becomes upset knowing that Heidi wants to leave her, and this makes Heidi feel guilty. Later in the afternoon, while the children are taking their lessons, Mr. Seesman and Clara's grandmother arrive at the mansion. They surprise Clara and also finally meet Heidi. Mr. Seesman is pleased to see how cheerful Clara is in the companion of Heidi, but Miss Rottenmeier breaks their bubble by speaking ill of Heidi. The grandmother did not easily believe what Miss Rottenmeier said. Instead, she wants to make up her own mind about it. That night, the grandmother reads a bedtime story for Heidi, and she eventually came to know that Heidi lives a very different life in the countryside and that a part of her feels empty. The grandmother reads through the story halfway and stops from there to leave it for Heidi to know what will happen next. The grandmother encourages Heidi to learn to read to continue the story herself. In the morning, the grandmother speaks with Mr. Seesman and assures him that Heidi is able to learn. But Heidi is not happy despite the comfort of living with them and suggests that Heidi returns to her home. Mr. Seesman is not pleased to hear this since he thinks that Clara is happy with Heidi, but the grandmother makes him realize that the only reason he wants to keep Heidi is because it stops him from feeling guilty of leaving Clara alone. When Heidi wakes up from bed, she grabs the book and tries to read the story, and by doing so, she successfully learns how to read. Heidi recites in front of the Seesmans, and Mr. Seesman announces that Heidi will be staying with them forever, but the news saddens Heidi. The grandmother ends her stay at the mansion and bids farewell to the children. That night, as Mr. Seesman and their private doctor are playing chess, they hear a mysterious noise coming from downstairs, which they assume to be a ghost, thus they get their guns to prepare for any attack. As they head towards the noise, they see Heidi sleepwalking and they follow her to her room. The doctor then finds out that Heidi is homesick, which causes her to sleepwalk. The doctor advises Mr. Seesman that he must send her home immediately as her health is at stake, and Mr. Seesman reluctantly decides to do as the doctor said. The next morning, Mr. Seesman explains to Clara that Heidi sleepwalks because she is suffering and the only way to cure her is to send her home. This breaks Clara's heart and she angrily leaves the room. Mr. Seesman tells Heidi that she will be leaving immediately, which she happily accepts, but she worries for Clara. As the servants load Heidi's belongings and the bread rolls to the carriage, Heidi gives the small wood eagle carving for Clara as a gift. Upon arriving at the village, Heidi leaves her belongings to the villagers and runs with Peter to his grandmother to give her the bread rolls. Heidi is then reunited with Uncle Alps and goes on to continue her day-to-day life in the countryside. Heidi writes letters to Clara, sharing her life about finally attending school and teaching Peter how to read. But most of all, she wishes that Clara could visit her. After receiving Heidi's letters, Clara and grandmother decide to visit Heidi at the Swiss Alps. Heidi happily welcomes them and the grandmother requests that Clara stays with Heidi for a few days, which Uncle Alps agrees to. While Clara enjoys her stay with Heidi, she also learns many things from Heidi which she can only learn at the countryside. After some time, Peter becomes jealous of Clara as Heidi spends more time with her. Peter's jealousy got worse when he intentionally destroys Clara's wheelchair, but this leads to Clara eventually getting the chance to go up the Alps and she takes in the beautiful view. Clara then sees a butterfly which causes her to stand, and with the help and support of Heidi and Peter, Clara learns to walk again. When the time comes for Mr. Seesman and grandmother to collect Clara, they are surprised to see Clara walk again. Before the Seesman bids their farewell, the grandmother gifts Heidi a notebook and encourages her to do what gives her joy regardless of what people say. The movie ends with Heidi writing in her notebook and spending the joy of her youth at the Alps with Peter. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and also subscribe my channel for more videos like this. See you in the next video.